Boom. All right, ladies and gentlemen, 1,116 episodes in, and I started because Gary Vee said back in the day that if you're in business, you need to be creating content, and podcasting was the media that I decided to go with. And today's guest is reiterating that for a specific industry. So if you've ever wondered, how am I going to create content? This might be the episode you want to check out. Let's get this one started. Here we go.
Shut up and sit down.
Look, a business can give you everything you want in life. Prestige, wealth, freedom. It can also take everything away from you. This show is for those who are willing to take that risk. These are the real life stories of entrepreneurs. But before we start, I have one small favor to ask. Please leave a comment. It can be advice, critiques, tips, feedback, or share this with someone because your engagement is the most valuable and most powerful form of social currency. So thank you, and welcome to another episode of Business Bros. On today's episode, ladies and gentlemen, we are diving into the world of real estate investing. Our guest has a passion for helping others share their message through the power of podcasting. He's also an experienced investor with a diverse portfolio and a constant drive to grow. So let's welcome to the show, without further ado, the founder of Podcasting You, Mr. Trevor Oldham. All right, Trevor, it's party time, man. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Excited to be here. Excited to chat today.
All right, dude. I'm right off the cuff. I'm going to start with this question. I usually ask it at the end, but you've been on a lot of podcasts. You help people get on a lot of podcasts. Just your experience in booking and getting on the show, communications, and maybe the intro. What's your experience been like so far on the Business Bros?
Yeah, it's been phenomenal. I mean, I love the intro. I think there's only been one other podcast I've been on in the last year that has the nice intro video, and then even when you introduce me, and then it looks like it almost cuts like the Project X, video of people, partying and exciting. Yeah, I love it, man. It was phenomenal. Definitely top notch. Definitely a lot different than your usual podcast. I enjoyed it.
And by the way, that aged you a little bit. If you know the movie Project X and that's a cutscene, we know you were born in the 1900s, bro, just like me. All right, man, let's do this thing. There's a lot of different aspects when it comes to being in business. One, probably the most important one, is how do you get in front of more prospective clients, whether it's building a network of people that you want to syndicate with, or just getting that normal listing or buyer's client. You decided to go the podcasting route. Walk me through your story. How'd you get from real estate investing to podcasting?
Yeah, most certainly. So I would say really story starts about 2015. So at that time I was running a different company, and it was with that company where I actually started my own podcast, and it was, interviewing real estate, investors, entrepreneurs, different individuals like that. And after about 2 years of running that company, I was just sort of burnt out. I was with a partner, it just wasn't working out, wasn't making that much revenue. So honestly, just a platform called Upwork. And, if you have heard of that, you can basically go on there and find freelancers. Started freelancing out my skills. I was editing people's podcasts, writing show notes. And one day I came across a turnkey real estate investor out of LA that wanted to get booked on podcasts. And I thought to myself, well, I booked some really good quality guests on my show. How hard could that be to get her booked on shows? Started working with her. And long story short, after about a year doing that and picking up new clients, I worked in really every different niche that I could. I worked with lawyers and business coaches and health professionals, and honestly over time I just found real estate investors were the funnest, easiest clients to work with. I enjoyed the aspect of it. And then after working with them for so long, I realized, hey, they may be onto something. A lot of these folks that I'm working with are pretty well off, they're pretty wealthy. Maybe I should start following what they're doing. And then that really got me interested into real estate investing. And I had a ton of connections in the space just for my own business, and started connecting with those folks and learning that I can invest passively as an investor. I don't have to go out and, and find the building and manage it or anything like that. I can just give my investor, say, $50K, and he does all of that, and, I get a cut of the profit share. And when I learned that, that was a game changer for me, and just working on building that out. So it was really, starting in the podcasting space, networking with those investors, and then utilizing those relationships that I had built really the last 6 years or so.
See, it's subtle, but that's the power of podcasting, really. You were able to I call it like the Matrix, like where Neo plugs into the Matrix. He's like, I know Kung Fu. Like that's the feeling I get from being able to interview so many different people in a space that I find interesting. You get to ask questions, you get to learn about their stories, their mistakes. Then you're literally getting them on other people's podcasts, and they're going to ask other types of questions. You learn so much more. Not to mention the network that you built. Like all those different things are aspects of podcasting that people don't quite understand. They think I'm going to get into podcasting because I want to be the next Joe Rogan. And they don't quite realize all the upsides of just starting a podcast or just getting onto podcasts. Did you have a similar feel? Like, is that what you kind of felt you got out of it?
Yeah, most certainly. And I would say definitely one from just going out there and starting my own podcast. I mean, I was able to talk to folks like Jay Papasan and David Osborne of Keller Williams, very successful investors, Mike Dillard, very successful online entrepreneur, and then even Dan Locke, another super successful online entrepreneur. And I was able to spend an hour and a half with him on my podcast when I was interviewing him. And he literally gave me all the secrets to building a successful business. And, if I went to Dan and said, hey, can I have an hour and a half? Your time is going to say no. But you can use the podcast as that avenue to bring guests on that you want to talk to that are maybe a little bit more successful than you. And then conversely, on the guesting side and running my business, just being able to be surrounded with those real estate investors, and our service, we've changed it over a little bit over the years where it's more of a high ticket service item. So usually the folks that are coming in are going to be those successful real estate investors, those that have been around for quite a while and know what they're doing and, just have that business acumen. So being able to connect with those folks, that opens the door to, and then when you're talking real estate, you learn about multifamily. Then we have a client in self-storage and mobile home park and mortgage notes. And there's a client that we were talking to where he will literally go out and buy life insurance policies on people that, not to sound morbid, but they're going to be, dying soon. So they have $1 million policy. He'll pay $750,000 for it. And then he knows within the next 6 months, they're going to pass away. And he goes out and collects a check for, $1 million, pays off the $750 that he invested and then makes $250K on it. You start to learn all these different aspects and all these different strategies where I had never heard of it. I didn't even know that was a thing, but just being around these people, really opened my mind to all the different possibilities out there.
Yeah. By the way, the proceeds from life insurance are tax free. Just throwing it out there. That's a quite nice little revenue. JG Wentworth. If you guys ever remember those commercials on TV back in the late 90s, that's exactly what they do. They help grab these settlements, these annuities, these life insurance policies, buy them out. Again, something you would have never known without the podcast. Let me ask you this. You have clients that want to be on podcasts. I literally book a show. We do 4 to 8 episodes a week. And these are people that are coming on the show. And I'm curious, why do people go to you and ask to be on a podcast? What's been your experience on why they want to get their message out?
I find they just want more exposure and they don't necessarily know what to do with like Google ads and Facebook ads, and then even like social media to a certain degree. They just want to be able to go on a podcast, say 30, 45-minute interview, and then that's all they have to do. And then, outside of that, if you like your company, you create the social media posts for them, the additional exposure that comes from that. But we find that folks they find, especially in the real estate space, that's obviously our specialty. It's very, network driven. It's very friendly. It's hard to get a deal just by sending someone an email or posting something out there on social media. We find that just building that relationship on a one-to-one basis really works well. And what's a better way to build a one-to-one relationship than spending 30 or 45 minutes with an individual, getting to talk to them, getting to learn their story, and then they, everyone gets the added benefit from it.
Yeah, let me talk to you about brand and mainly because, especially in the real estate space, a real estate agent, their brand, to me, has become more and more and more important over the years. In the past, the way I like to explain it to agents is like this. Like if I wanted to know something pre-internet, I would have to go to the library, go to the card catalog, find out what book it's in, go pull the book, and hopefully I find the information that I'm looking for. Internet comes along. Google makes it super easy. Now I just search for what I want. Google gives me a bunch of links, and hopefully I can find the information I'm looking for in those links. But tomorrow, or I should say today, now we got things like ChatGPT where I don't need to look for the book and then look, it's just going to give me the answer I'm looking for. And so I feel like more and more brand has to be more important, because people aren't going to search for who's the best realtor or who can it's just going to look and give them a direct answer. And if your brand is out there saying every single day, I'm that real estate agent, I'm that realtor, I'm that person who's giving out content, information, educating you, that's the one. Those are the people who are going to win in this space. Creating a podcast or being on podcast is one way to break up your content, show up on a regular basis, stay relevant, and create that brand you're looking for. Is that something that you think is important to these people who are coming on your show?
Oh, most certainly. I mean, at the end of the day, you could, let's say if you're a real estate agent, you're a real estate investor, you could have the best deal, you could have the best, property. But if no one knows who you are, it's just going to go by the wayside. Again, specifically, we work with a ton of real estate investors, and a lot of the times they're raising capital for a deal. They find let's say $10 million deal, and they have to do a $2 million capital raise. Even if it's like a distressed asset, ton of value add, the fixed rate there, they don't have to go out and get a loan. They can do seller financing. But if no one knows who you are, that deal's going to fall by the wayside, and that deal could have made you millions of dollars or, hundreds of thousands of dollars. But again, if no one knows who you are, and that's like in any business, whether you're in real estate, whether you're a real estate agent, if you're not marketing yourself, if you're not putting yourself out there, it's going to be incredibly hard for you to sustain and to grow that business.
Oh, 100%. So let me ask you this. What are some common misconceptions people might have about maybe starting a podcast or just generating content that you've seen when you talk to your clients, something that they probably have a hurdle that is mainly made up in their head that you help them overcome?
Yeah, I would say the biggest one is when we're talking to clients is they say, does someone really want to hear my story? Does someone really want to hear what I have to say? And there's going to be value in every story. I mean, unless you're, I feel like there's a value in everyone's story, unless you've never done literally anything in your life, which the probability of that happening is almost next to none. Even if you're a real estate investor and you have, 2 units on your belt, you have a duplex. Well, there's someone out there that wants to get into real estate investing but has no idea how to do it. So you being one step ahead of them, they can learn from you. And conversely, there's folks that we've worked with that, they don't even have a website, and they're like, hey, can people even hear about me? But they're super successful at what they've done, but they've just never done the online marketing. So yes, there's you always have something to share when you're going out there on podcasts. And I find that's a hurdle that a lot of our clients have to overcome, is not that they don't think they're valuable, they just don't think they have enough good information to share. I mean, when you're talking to a real estate investor that's been in the business 20 years, there's so much wealth of knowledge there that it's our job to convince them that like so many audiences can learn from them, and it's going to be worth their while, just on the information that's going to be pulled out of them on the different podcasts.
Isn't it strange? Like, we never give ourselves any credit for the experience, the wisdoms, the mistakes, like all the stuff that we've gone through to get to where we're at. I'm 40 years old. I've made a ton of mistakes. I've lost a lot of money. I've made a lot of money over my lifetime, but in every single aspect that I've gone through, that's a lesson that you're able to share. And that is what I feel like creating content and posting is all about. It's to share those experiences so that people connect with you. Today, I mean, I even have it at the top of our screen here, want to build a following. I feel like that's changing. People are looking for more of a community than a following. When you talk to your clients and you talk about, developing that message for themselves and sharing those stories, how much of that goes into also building community so that they can grow that circle of influence?
Oh, most certainly. Definitely going back to the community. And usually when I'm talking about a community and what I share for our clients is when they're going out there and sharing their story, don't just share the success and everything that you've done. Everyone started off at a starting point. And like what I like to share to them is, you have your A to B story. You obviously, unless you're, your family was into real estate, the majority of folks in real estate, are first generation folks that are doing it. How did you get into real estate, and how did you go from, say, not knowing anything about real estate to owning 100 units, 1,000 units, $500 million or $500 million in assets under management? That's a story that people want to hear, and that's a story that people are going to relate to, is they want to hear your more so than your successes, your failures, because people can relate to that more. People might have a hard time relating to someone that has 100 units, but they can relate to, tenants that are giving you a problem, or your tenants aren't paying rent, or they trash the unit, whatever it may be. People are going to relate to your problems more than sometimes your successes, especially if you're many steps ahead of the typical person.
This it reminds me of a movie, Leonardo DiCaprio's Catch Me If You Can. I don't know if you've watched that, where he's a con artist. He literally like pretends to be people that he's not. An airline pilot. He pretended to be a doctor, an attorney, even though he apparently did pass the bar. But at the very beginning of the movie, he pretends to be a teacher, and he teaches a class essentially for a semester. And the guy that Leonardo DiCaprio plays, the actual person who was this guy in real life, they asked him, like, how were you able to do that? And his answer was pretty simple. He's like, I was just a chapter ahead of the rest of the class. And I think that's where a lot of us feel like that experience, we have to have like level 100 experience for us to be able to stand up and teach, but we don't. We really only have to be just ahead of somebody else, like you were saying, so that we can teach that person that skill that we have just learned. Because at the end of the day, you don't really know what you know until you try to teach it to somebody. Then you realize how much you know and how much you don't know. So for me, like, this podcasting thing has allowed me to find my voice, find my messaging, and teach some of those little things that I've become an expert at. So how do you convince them to start a podcast versus just be on podcasts?
Yeah, the way I like to say it is, let's say you're going out there and you're starting your own podcast. That's the following that you're building. I'm coming onto your podcast today. This is the following that you've built. But if I want my own listeners, my own people to follow me, I'm just coming on as a guest. At the end of the day, you're the host. That's the person they're going to resonate more with, because they're going to hear your voice, a lot more than they're going to hear my voice. They're going to hear me one time, and that's going to be the end of it, where they're hearing your voice every day. So when you're going out there and starting your own podcast, you control the narrative. I mean, to a certain degree, I'm at the whim of the questions that you're going to be asking me, where if you're the podcast host, you get to ask your own questions to the guests. You get to structure your show your own way, where the majority of podcasts you're going on, they could be a little bit similar. I mean, you have your intro, your talking points, then the end of the interview. But when you're your own podcast host, you get to dictate how the flow goes. You get to dictate the questions. You get to build that following. You get to own that sort of traffic source, where let's say if I'm on your podcast today and it goes live, and I pick up a few new clients from the interview, well, that's great, but that's just from that one interview, and I'm not going to go on your podcast every single day. Where conversely, if I have my own show, I can consistently pick up clients from it. If I have that podcast going for 6 months, a year, 2 years, there's no indefinite time period of ending. I get to really build that relationship with the audience that I'm building, where if I'm a podcast guest, sometimes the audience might only hear me one time, and it can be a little bit difficult to build a strong connection with them. Where again, but I think when you look at both of them, it also goes down to, when you're a podcast guest, you could probably see results a lot quicker. Where when it comes to being a podcast host, it could take anywhere from 6 to 12 months of you doing consistent interviews, say on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, for you to start getting some results coming, just because it takes a little bit longer to build that audience. So they both have their ups and downs, but they both have, their advantages. So if I were to say to someone what I would recommend, and this is like what I recommend for our clients, is if you have the time on hand, be a guest and start your own podcast. If you're time crunched, then it just makes sense for you to go out there and be a guest on podcasts, because you don't have to do anything with the podcast. You don't have to edit it. You don't have to produce it. You just show up for the interview. But I think that there's benefits in both of them.
There absolutely is. I always find that I think being a guest is a great place to start, because you'll know right away whether it's something that you like to do, or it's like, this definitely wasn't for me. So start off as that guest spot. The other aspect of it is just dedicating the consistent time to do the actual podcasting, because life is going to come and get in the way of almost everything. And if you don't make it a priority, it really won't succeed. So let me ask you about building a show. What are some like practical, tactical tips that people can utilize so that they can create a show, and more importantly, get past that pod fade episode of like that 7 to 12 episode marker?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first off, for those going out there that are starting it, one, you got to make a commitment to yourself. Like I mentioned, you got to know you're going to be doing it at least 6 to 12 months. And in the beginning, especially if you don't have a massive social media following, don't be discouraged if you have your first interview go out, or your first couple interviews, and it's your mom, your dad, your best friend, and someone else listening to it. You know, you have 4 listeners. We all got to start somewhere. So one, you got to be consistent with it. Two, you got to have a backfill. And for those listening, what a backfill is basically pre-recorded episodes with other guests. So this is what I mean. Like if you're going out there and starting your podcast, maybe you record 10 to 15 episodes with guests, or if you're doing a solo podcast, whatever it may be, have those episodes ready and scheduled out. So that way, if something comes up in your life and you can't record for a month, you don't have to worry about it. I find too many people fail with starting a podcast. They're recording an episode today and they're putting it out tomorrow. And that's just living very dangerously in the podcasting world, because eventually something is going to come up. And then 3, I would say, you know, when you're starting your podcast, figure out like what do you want to talk about and make it unique to yourself. I mean, there's so many podcasts out there and you can look to other podcasts, but at the end of the day, you have to make your show unique to yourself and your own personality, where you don't want to go out there and necessarily copy what someone else is doing, because what else is someone else is doing might not fit for your own personality. So it's really a mixture of that. It's just being consistent with it, having that backfill. And then I also say, like, if you're doing an interview podcast and you're talking to the guest, just make sure that you're prepared for the interview. You know, not just sort of, I mean, there's a degree to a conversation. I would say, like in the interview today, you came very prepared. There's been times where it's been awkward pauses where the person's looking at their notes, and you could just tell they weren't ready for the interview, and it just makes for an uncomfortable conversation. That's not what you want. Where I would say starting your own podcast, it might be uncomfortable as a host the first 5 or so episodes, but you're going to get the hang of it over time. You got to just keep pushing yourself past that fear and that sort of that fear of the unknown. But at the end of the day, it's going to be well worth it. And it was, I mean, just from my learning curve when I was going out and building my other business, I mean, just being able to talk to these individuals that were, you know, 7-figure entrepreneurs where, you know, I was doing $1,000 a month in revenue, you know, that just allowed me to accelerate my learning. And for those that are starting their own podcast, say if you are a real estate investor, a real estate agent, and let's say you're a real estate agent per se and you want to grow your business, why not interview real estate agents that are consistently doing 7 million a year, or, you know, 7 figures a year in commissions earned? Then you can start to get around those folks, learn what they're doing, learn their tactics, their strategies, and then all of a sudden you can start implementing it in your business.
It's amazing how often those people will say yes, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
It's been in my experience, prospecting. When I was in real estate, I hated the thought of prospecting. It was something I did not look forward to at all, because nobody wanted to hang out and have a cup of coffee and, you know, do that weird thing. But as soon as I started doing the podcast, almost everybody I asked was like, yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, I'll do that. And that was 30, 45 minutes, an hour of their time. And now you're surrounding yourself with exactly the type of people that you want to be around. Because they always say, like, if you add the average of the 5 people you hang out with, their incomes, that's usually where you're going to land. And podcasting is one of those tools where you can start surrounding yourself with the mentors and people that are already successful. Now, I know the question when you talked about, you know, being prepared for the show, that sort of thing is, you know, I'm not creative. I don't know how to do that. So I wanted to make sure I drop it in here for you guys. I have 4 ChatGPT prompts that I use to set up every single episode so that I am well prepared for every interview. If you guys want that, shoot me a DM at Business Bros Pod. I'll hook that up with you guys. But that, I mean, using the tools that are out there, it makes things so much easier for podcasters today. I don't know how long you've been doing this, but, you know, if it was anywhere more than 5 years, the way you produced the show 5 years ago to where you can produce it today has drastically changed, right? It makes it a lot easier. Would you agree?
Oh, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, I was back in 2015 when I was running my own show, and I could just tell the technology today just makes it so much easier to use run. And then, like you mentioned, like Chat GPT. I mean, if you're anyone in business, you got to be looking into that. I mean, I just started really diving into that probably the last month or so, and it's been blowing my mind. And it's like every day I'm playing around with it, using, you know, new tools, new tactics from it, and it's immense for my business. And it's just crazy how much it can shorten, you know, everyday tasks that I was doing in my business, where I might spend an hour on a task and I tell it what to do or tell it to give me a response, and next thing I know, 5 minutes later, the whole task is done for me, which is phenomenal. So for anyone in your audience, I can back that up and check out, you know, what you're offering. I would definitely recommend that. It's been a phenomenal tool for me in my business.
Oh man. And that's the thing about where we're at in this like whole content creation space, the whole internet space, everything is changing. It's like when Facebook just came out, taking over that MySpace, and all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, Google has pay-per-click. Wait a minute, you can advertise on Facebook. Like there's this whole realm of new experiences that's coming to market. And I feel like that's the revolution we're in right now. Like this AI piece is, AI is not going to take over. They're just a bunch of tools that for those of you who are savvy enough to put and implement into your business, you're going to go light speed faster than anybody else in your competitive industry. And when it comes to making content, I feel like that's where podcasting can be so beneficial for so many people. So let me ask you, Podcast You, tell me what that is. What can people find when they go to your website?
Yeah, most certainly. So my website, so we basically help folks, specifically real estate investors, get booked on podcasts. So if they go to the website, there's you can see testimonials, a nice little copy, all about the good services and different things like that. And then they, if they want to book a discovery call there with our company, you'll book a call, it'll go right to our client relations manager, and then they can have a chat if that's something they're interested in.
And what's that usually run? Like if you wanted to get on multiple podcasts, like what can somebody expect? Let's assume I'm a client, right? I'm a real estate investor. I'm like, look, I need to get more exposure. So I go to your website, I start to talk to somebody. What can I expect?
Yeah, most certainly. So typically, like our standard package is 10 interviews for $3,500, or we'll do like 20 interviews for $6K. So basically, drop the price $50 per interview. And then like once we're to give you an example, we'll book a client on 10 podcasts, 3,500. We'll do that in about 6 weeks or so. Get those interviews scheduled out for them, and then we'll typically move them over to a recurring revenue service where from there on out we'll book them on 2 podcasts a month for $697. Or I believe we'll do 3 podcasts a month for $997, something like that. A little bit on the pricing. But yeah, we'll basically move those over, and it's been a good business strategy for us where we get that high ticket up front, but instead of going back to the client and asking them for another high ticket offer, unless it makes sense and there's a ton of podcasts left out there to book, but to really get them on that reoccurring revenue aspect stream has just been phenomenal for our business. And honestly, it wasn't even something I prioritized until I know it was literally like last year. I've been in business 5 years, and we were just doing high ticket, and eventually got to the point where I always had to sell high ticket, sell these high end packages, the 3,500 or 6K, and I had to do that every single month. So by building up the recurring revenue stream, it just made it easier. Where now, I know in any given month, all the expenses and my salary is going to be paid for, and then it just makes growth a lot easier, and it makes it a lot easier to invest, in additional resources, that typically wouldn't have been doing. It's a lot easier to keep the lights on, so it's been good that way.
And ladies and gents, this is where I talk about podcasting like a pro. So I literally work with people like Trevor and other PR agencies to get guests on the show. And we have free versions and we have paid versions. The free version's booked out 10 weeks in advance. So it's hard to get a free version on our show. But our premium version, that's where people can hop on these shows as quick as possible. These are the ones that our PR agencies use. These are the ones that like Trevor uses to get on the show and on our calendar as soon as possible, because we've created a podcast and a show and a model that their clients will have a great experience on. So if you create a podcast and you want to learn the podcast like a pro so that you can get clients like that, now it's a nice synergy when you're working with clients like Trevor, because that's exactly what you're doing. He needs to fill the spot for his clients. You're providing a podcast that you already enjoy. You get to learn from that particular client and earn some revenue for doing so. Like, it's a match made in heaven. What do you think about that, Trevor?
Yeah, and I agree. I love the business model behind it, and I feel like too, given that advantage, where I could go in, I could do it, the free option, but I gotta wait, like you mentioned, I think it was like till April, or I could pay, your fee and get it booked out, in a week or two, or a few weeks, however long. And, for me, running my company, I think you guys run a really good price point where it's not like I've seen podcasts charge like 10K. I can't have my client pay 10K, but at your price point, it's very reasonable where I'm happy to pay it on behalf of our clients to get them that spot, because then it makes us look good, on our end, getting them the bookings. And then you also get the added benefit because obviously there's production costs on your end. It's also your time. So I overall, I think it's a really good strategy. And I recommend, again, someone in your audience to use that strategy. I think it, even if they're covering, get a couple $100s a month to cover their production costs where they don't have to do it, it's well worth it.
It totally 100% is. Trevor, before we head out, we're running low on time here. I want to make sure I give you the floor. Any final thoughts? And then, of course, plug your stuff one more time so I can pop some stuff up on the screen and let people know how to get a hold of you.
Yeah, most certainly. I would say that's just the biggest thing would just to be start, whether you're going out there and starting your own podcast, whether you're going out there being a podcast guest, going to be super uncomfortable in the beginning, unless you're super extroverted. But for the majority of us, it's going to be, uncomfortable. But I can guarantee you, after you produce your 5 first episodes, whether you're going out there getting interviewed on 5 different podcasts, once you get over that 5th one, you're going to become more relaxed, going to become more comfortable. So I can't recommend it enough. Don't let that fear hold you back. And then if you are looking to go out there and get booked on podcasts as a podcast guest, you can just go to our website, podcastyou.com. It's podcastyou.com, and you can book a discovery call with our team, and we'll basically do a consultation, take a look at your company, and figure out how we may be able to help you.
Perfect, man. Perfect. And by the way, you guys can follow him on social too, at Trevor J. Oldham, and shoot him an email if you guys are interested, trevor@podcastyou.com. Either way, it doesn't matter how you choose to contact Trevor. If you're interested in starting a podcast or you're interested in getting on a podcast and you're in the real estate space, that's the type of niche you want to work with, somebody who's already in that space, because he's got a catalog of different shows that are going to fit your niche. Like, you can go to a bunch of different agencies, but not all of them are very niche down. So if you're in the real estate space, make sure you guys check out podcastyou.com. He can help you with other places too, but definitely in the real estate niche. Trevor, thank you very much for coming on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the power of podcasting. I mean, it's open door. You can get all kinds of information. You can learn so much. You can build your network. You can build your brand, but it's going to take a little bit of commitment, a little bit of effort. And when you got a good team like Trevor behind you, it'll make things so much easier. Podcastyou.com is the website. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace. And I'm out.
It's over. Go home.
Is your business in need of marketing? Try starting a podcast, but not just any podcast. Podcast like a pro. We can show you how to take your business from being invisible to becoming a brand people trust. Go to www.businessbros.biz to get started today.